We see the Viking age in flashes of fire and steel, a world of violent motion, the axe falling, the longship crashing through waves, the charge of a shield wall. But the greatest Viking terror wasn't found in the heart of a battle. It was found in the silence that followed. It was the chilling stillness of a body growing cold. A warrior's life was a frantic prayer to Odin for a glorious end, a final, bloody spectacle worthy of a song. But the gods are fickle. And for many, the end came not with a roar but with a whisper, a fevered breath in a smoky longhouse, a festering wound that refused to heal. This was the true Viking fear, not death itself but the wrong kind of death, a death that left the body behind, a vessel whose spectral passenger might refuse to leave. What they did next with the corpse of their friend, their chieftain, their father, was not about grief. It was about fear. It was a series of forgotten rituals, a desperate form of spiritual warfare waged against their own dead. To understand their fear, you must understand their map of the afterlife. It was a landscape of stark, terrifying choices. Die in battle with a weapon in your hand, and the Valkyries might carry you to Valhalla, Odin's great hall, to feast and fight until Ragnarök. This was the good death, the one they craved. But die of sickness, of old age, in your bed, a straw death, and your soul was cast down a darker road, a road to the grim, frozen realm of hell. A place of eternal boredom and shadow, ruled by Loki's half-dead daughter. Every Viking funeral, every strange and brutal ritual, was an attempt to navigate this choice, to steer the soul of the departed away from that cold, dark road. But more importantly, it was to ensure that if the soul got lost, it couldn't find its way back. The true horror wasn't Helheim. It was the possibility of never leaving at all. It was the fear of the Draugr. This is no shambling, mindless zombie. The Draugr of Norse lore is a terrifying, animated corpse, retaining its intelligence but twisted by malevolence. It possessed superhuman strength, could swell to enormous size, and reeked of decay. As told in tales like Grettir's saga, the Draugr would rise from its own burial mound, a bloated, blue-black horror to slaughter livestock, terrorize the living, and jealously guard the treasures buried with it. It was the vengeful dead, the ultimate failure of a funeral rite. Every ritual was a lock on a cage, every prayer a chain, and every Viking knew what happened if those chains broke. The first ritual began the moment life ended. The body had to be removed from the longhouse, but it could not pass through the main door. To a Viking, a threshold was a powerful, mystical barrier. A spirit who left through the front door could easily find its way back, so they created a temporary exit. A hole was smashed through the wall behind where the body lay. This was the Nagrind, the corpse gate. The body was passed through, feet first, and the opening was immediately sealed up. It was a simple, brutal piece of supernatural misdirection, a way of tricking the newly freed spirit, of making its old home unfamiliar, of confusing its path back to the world of the living. Once outside, the corpse itself was seen as a weapon that could be turned against them. Precautions had to be taken. Archaeological evidence from across Scandinavia reveals bodies in graves with their ankles bound together. Sagas describe needles being driven through the soles of the corpse's feet or sickles being placed in the grave, their sharp blades pressed against the dead man's throat. These were not symbolic gestures. They were grimly practical. A spirit might be able to move, but it would have a much harder time walking if its feet were tied, or its flesh was pinned to the earth. They were disarming the dead before they laid them to rest. The Vikings had two primary technologies for disposing of a body: fire and earth, cremation and inhumation. A simple choice to the modern mind, but for them, it was a decision of profound spiritual consequence. To burn a body was to utterly transform it. Fire was a purifier, a gateway. It could dissolve the physical shell and liberate the spirit, sending it soaring upward with the smoke, hopefully toward the halls of the gods. Burial, on the other hand, was an act of preservation. It kept the body whole, providing it a new, subterranean home, a vessel from which to embark on its final journey. But a preserved body was a dangerous body, a body that could still be woken. Cremation was the most dramatic of their rites, a spectacle of terrible beauty. The 10th century Arab diplomat Ibn Fadlan witnessed the funeral of a Rus chieftain on the Volga River, and his account remains our most visceral link to this lost world. He describes a ship, pulled onto the shore, surrounded by a great pyre of wood. The chieftain, dressed in his finest silks and surrounded by his weapons, was laid upon a mattress on the ship's deck. Bread, meat, and strong drink were placed beside him. It was a vessel prepared for a final, fiery voyage. As the flames took hold, devouring the ship, the sail, and the man within, the chieftain's warriors would beat their shields, the sound like thunder, to drown out the sounds of the dying, and to ward off any malevolent spirits attracted by the ceremony. Ibn Fadlan's account descends into a far darker place. He records a ritual that chills the blood. A slave girl from the chieftain's household volunteered to join him in death. For 10 days she was feasted and celebrated, dressed in fine clothes, and passed from man to man. When the day came, she was led to the ship by an old woman known as the Angel of Death. She was given a final, intoxicating drink and led onto the funeral ship. While the men beat their shields, 2 men strangled her with a cord while the Angel of Death stabbed her repeatedly with a dagger. Her body was placed beside her master's. She was not just a sacrifice. She was a guide, a companion, a servant for the next world, sent to ensure her master did not travel alone. The alternative to fire was just as monumental. The great ship burials, like those unearthed at Oseberg and Gokstad in Norway, reveal a different philosophy. Here, a chieftain was not sent to the heavens in smoke, but to another world across a spectral sea. An entire ocean-going longship would be dragged from the water, sometimes for miles, and placed in a massive, specially dug trench. The deceased was laid to rest in a timber burial chamber built on the deck. The ship, with its master and all their possessions, was then buried, a mountain of earth and stone piled on top, creating an artificial hill that would dominate the landscape for 1,000 years. These ship burials were not tombs. They were fully equipped homes for the afterlife. Archaeologists at Oseberg found the remains of 2 women, likely a queen and her attendant, along with beds, tapestries, kitchenware, a finely carved wooden cart, and the skeletons of 15 horses, 4 dogs, and an ox. These were not mere symbols of wealth. They were practical necessities. The dead needed to travel, to eat, to sleep, to be entertained. They were provided with everything they might need, in the desperate hope that, with all their needs met, they would have no reason to return and trouble the living. The burial mound, the hogger, was more than a gravestone. It became a potent liminal space. It was the ancestral home, a seat of power radiating from the dead chieftain within. Living chieftains would sometimes hold court on the mounds of their forefathers to draw on their authority. Warriors would sleep on the mounds, hopping to receive dreams or prophetic visions from the one buried beneath. But it was a place of danger, a threshold to the underworld that on certain nights might swing open. To approach a mound after dark was to court disaster, to risk an encounter with its undead guardian. What happened when the rituals failed? When a draugr began to walk? The sagas are clear on the terrifying solution. You had to kill the dead a second time. A party of the bravest warriors, led by a hero like Grettir, would have to excavate the mound and confront the monster within. The only way to permanently stop a draugr was through horrific, systematic mutilation. The corpse had to be wrestled from its tomb, its head severed with a sword, and then placed at its own buttocks. This final humiliation was believed to permanently sever the connection between the spirit and its body. The remains were then burned to ash, and the ash scattered in the sea. It was a desperate, profane act of spiritual cleansing. To mark a grave and honor the dead, the Vikings raised runestones. These were not simple eulogies. They were public, legal, and magical documents carved in stone. A runestone would proclaim the name of the deceased, their deeds, and crucially, who their legal heirs were, preventing disputes. But the runes themselves were magical. The very act of carving them imbued them with power. Some runic inscriptions are curses, binding the dead to their grave, warning away tomb robbers, and reinforcing the spiritual walls of their earthen prison. They were the final lock on the cage. The corpse door, the bound feet, the sacrificial slave, the ship in the earth, the second killing. These are not disparate, savage customs. They are pieces of a single, coherent system, an architecture of fear. For the Vikings, the line between the living and the dead was perilously thin. Death was not an ending but a dangerous transformation. A loved one could become a monster overnight. Every ritual, no matter how brutal, was a necessary defense. A desperate attempt to manage that transformation, to pacify the dead, and to protect the fragile world of the living from the eternal, grasping hunger of the grave. We believe we have tamed death. We encase it in polished wood and gleaming metal, seal it in concrete vaults, and hide it beneath manicured lawns. Our rituals are sterile, designed to keep the unsettling reality of the corpse as far away as possible. We fear decay, the biological truth of our end. The Vikings had a different fear. They did not fear the decay, they feared the persistence. They knew the body, even in death, had power. Their forgotten rituals, born of terror and a grim respect for the dead, show a people who engaged with mortality in a way we can barely comprehend. They looked their dead in the face, bound their hands, and fought them if they had to. Perhaps our modern rituals are not a sign of progress, but of a different kind of fear. A fear not of the dead returning, but of confronting the truth that we are all, eventually, just bodies waiting for a final journey. This was another story from the Fear Room. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore more terrifying truths and ancient mysteries right here in the Fear Room.